Hi friends, welcome back to React.js Zero to Hero series. This series is for beginners who wants to learn React.js from scratch. In the last video, I have explained about how we can invoke HTTP request in React. That is the last topic in the basic concept series. And in this video, I am going to create a complete application in React using all the basic concepts we have learned so far. Let's start. So this is the application we are going to create today. This is a web application for a fruits and vegetables shop. This has a home page in which we can see a header with few navigation links and then a cart. Here we can see a carousel. And then we are showing few carts. Finally, we are having two popular sections where we are showing popular fruits and vegetables. And using these links, we can go to fruits or vegetables page. In these pages, we are showing some items with details like price, weight, and add to cart button. When we click, the product will be added to the cart. And we can click this cart button to go to the cart page. Here also, we can modify the quantity, and finally we can place the order. If the user is not logged in, the user will be taken to the login page where they can log in. User can also click the login link to go to the login page. If the user is already logged in, user can place the order, and so this final screen will be shown and the cart will be cleared. Okay, let's start creating this application. First, let us create a new React application. Okay, the application is created. Let me start the server, and so we can see this. Let me open the application in VS Code. Fine. Let's start with the app component. And I wanted to show you how we can structure our code. There are different approach people follow. Some people group the JS and CSS file of a particular feature in single folder. In this application, let's group all our components in a separate folder and all our styles in a separate folder and other items like services, images, each one in separate folders. So for that, let me create a folder called components and another folder called styles, another one called images, and one more called services. Okay, let me move my app component inside components folder, and let me do some cleanup in app component. And so I can delete these files. Now in index.js, I need to change this part. And so we can see this now. Okay, let's start with routing. For that, first we need to install the React Router DOM library. Let me do that. And then in index.js, let me import browser router from React Router DOM and wrap this app component with browser router. Next, I need to go to app component. Here I need to import routes and route from React Router DOM. And instead of this div, let me create routes element. And inside that, let me have a route element. For the route element, let me give the path as /home and the element as the home component. I need to import the home component. Wait a minute. Home component is not yet created. Let me create that. Okay, now I can import that here. Let's preview once. Okay, when the application is loaded, it will be good if it goes to the home page. For that, let me create another route. Let me copy this and change the route path to /. Now we can see when the application loads, it will route to the home page. Okay, now let's create a header component. And let me add that in the index.js. In header component, let me create a container div. I am going to use CSS modules. Let me show you how we can create CSS module. First, let me create a file inside styles folder. The name of the file should be like something.module.css. For this, let me have it as header.module.css. In header.js, let me import this CSS. Like this. Now instead of hard coding the class name, let me change it like this. And let me add the styles in this CSS file. And so we can see this. Actually, I'm not going to concentrate on CSS. And so let me add the other styles in this file and copy all the CSS files we are going to use in this application. I will add the entire code in GitHub. And so if you need to refer the CSS styles, you can take it from there. Also, I'm going to use a couple of Google fonts. And so I'm going to import that in the index.css and add some styles. Okay, in header component, let me add a div for logo. Another div for nav with two nav items div. And then let me have a div for cart. Inside that, let me have an image and then a span. I need to add a cart image. I'm going to use many images in this application. So first let me copy all the images inside images folder. Now I need to use this cart image. For that, I can import the image. Like this. And I can use this variable here. So we can see the cart image. This style is not good, but this will be corrected soon. Finally, let me add a div for login. And so we can see this. Okay, let's move to the home component. In home page, we are going to have a carousel and then a cart section, and after that a couple of popular sections. We can have all the codes in a single component, but it will be good if we create smaller components for each section. Let me create them. And let me also import the respective CSS files in each component. Now let me add these components in the home component. And so we can see this. Let's start with banner. In the banner, there is a carousel component. For that, we are going to use this third-party library. So first let me install that. Okay, it is installed. Let's refer their implementation. They have imported this CSS and they have also imported this carousel component from this library. Then let's copy this and change the images and text. Okay, carousel is working, but it is not moving automatically. Also, we are able to see these sections. So we need to customize this. If you see the props list, we can see we can use some props to customize based on our requirement. We can set autoplay to true so that the carousel change slides automatically. And we can set the infinite loop to true so that it keeps on changing. And then let me change the interval to 3000 milliseconds. That means 3 seconds. And let me use show thumbs to false so that the thumbnails will not be shown. Also, we need to hide this. For that, we can use show status false. Okay, this is fine. Let's add a call to action button to each slide. Okay, looks good. Let's move to the cart section. Here first let me have a cart container, and inside that let me have a cart div, and inside that let me have a caption div and an image. Let me import the images. We can add a background color in this class, but we are going to add 2 more cards and each card should have a different background color. So it will be good to have a separate class for adding background color. But how can we add another class here when we are using CSS modules? We can actually use the template string to use multiple class names like this. Now we can see the background color is added. Let me quickly create the other 2 cards as well. And so we can see this. We need to reduce the width of the main container. CSS for that is already there. Let me add the class name. In the index.js, I need to wrap this app component inside app container class. Now we can see it looks good. Okay, let's move to the popular component. Here let me create a div for container, and inside that let me create a div for title and another div for holding all items. Inside this items div, we are going to list all the items. We are actually using the popular component in home component. So we can pass the details to popular component from home component. First, instead of hard coding the title here, let me pass this as props. And in popular component, let me get that props and use it here. So we can see this. Now let's see how we can list the items. First of all, I want to say that I have created a SQL database and I have added these fruits and vegetables data in that database. Also, I have developed a Node application and exposed an API. That Node application is already started and running. And so we can see this data. Let's use this API in our application. First, in home component, let me create a function. Inside this function, I can use Axios to invoke this get API. For that, let me stop my server and install Axios. Okay, Axios is installed. And here, first let me import Axios. And then inside this function, let me call the get method from Axios, in which let me pass the API URL. This is going to give us a promise. So let me resolve that and print the response. We need to call this function while loading the page. For that, let me have a useEffect hook which runs once while the component is mounted. I can achieve that by having an empty dependency array. Inside the useEffect, let me call this function. And so in console, we can see all the data. So we can actually send this data to other components through props. But when we add a product to cart, we need to maintain that state throughout our application. Also in this approach, the API will be called every time when we visit home page. That may reset our state also. To avoid this, first let's introduce a context. For that, inside services folder, let me create a new file. In this file, let me import create context from React. And let me create the context and store it in a variable. Let me export that context. And then let me create a function which accepts a props and return a provider from this context. Inside this, let me have props.children so that when we wrap any component with this provider, that can use this context. In this custom provider function, let me have a state. I'm going to use useState. And I'm going to maintain the cart and all products. Also, I can pass this as the value to this provider. Okay, our context is ready. Now let me go to index.js and import this provider there. And then let me wrap this inside the provider. Now this header component, app component, and all the subcomponents can access the same context. That means our entire application can use the same context. So now in home component, let me import the context. And I can use the useContext hook to get the states from the context. For that, I need to import the useContext. And I can get the state like this. And here I can get the products from the response. And then I can set the state in the context. Please note that we need to first spread the existing state and then set the products. Otherwise, we will lose the other states. Now inside the useEffect, we can have a if condition to call this function only when the products array in the state is empty. Next step is to segregate the fruits and vegetables separately and pass that to the respective popular component. For that, let me create another function which accepts a products array. Inside this function, let me create two temporary variables and a for loop to process each product. If the product type is going to be fruits, I can push that to this temporary fruits array. But here we need to push only the popular fruits. Actually, I'm maintaining a flag which decides whether the product is popular or not. And so let me add that condition as well. Now I can create a state for holding the fruits and another state for holding the vegetables. And here let me set the fruits. Similarly, let me also segregate the vegetables and set that in vegetables. Now I can pass the fruits and vegetables through props like this. Finally, we need to call this function. Let me call it here and pass the products. And in useEffect, when this condition fails, let me call this function. This time, let me pass state.products. Okay, let's go back to popular component. Here I can use map to loop through all the items and render each item. I can use the ID as key. Now we can see this. Let me add a container to hold the image. And I can use the item.pick as image source. And then let me add a container to hold some data. Inside that, let me add the name and weight first. And then I need to add the price. For price, I need to show the current price always. And when the previous price and current price are different, we need to show the previous price in a different style. For that, we can use the conditional rendering like this. Finally, we need to have a button to add to cart. We need to create that functionality as a separate component so that we can use that in different places. For now, let me add a div to hold that component. And then let me create the component to add item to cart. In this component, first let me have a container, and inside that let me create a button. And let me use this component in popular component. I am going to pass the item as props. We are going to use this soon. Now we can see the add button. When it is clicked, we need to add the item to cart. For that, first we need to add an onClick handler which calls a function. Let me create this function, and inside this I need to write the logic. But first, we need to get the state from the context. For that, let me import the use context and app context. And then let me use the use context to get the state. Like this. Now inside this function, let me get the cart from the state and assign that to a temp cart variable. Actually, we are passing the item as props. And so we can get that here and we can push that item into this temp cart. And finally, we can set the cart in the state. Now we have added the item into the cart, but it would be nice if we show a count in this place on top of the cart image. For that, let me go to the header component and let me get the state from context here, like how we get it before in add item component. And then in between this image and span, I'm going to conditionally render the count. When the length of the cart in the state is greater than 0, let me show this count div in which I'm showing the cart length. And so we can see this. When I add an item to the cart, we can see the count. Next thing is to change the button design to add more quantity. For that, first we need to add a new property called quantity to our item. Let's do that in our home component where we fetch the data. Let me loop through all the products and add a quantity property. And in add item component, let me set this quantity to 1. And here I'm going to show this button only when the quantity is going to be 0. Otherwise, I'm going to show this div. Inside this div, I'm going to have a button to reduce the quantity, a div to show the quantity, and another button to increase the quantity. And so, now if I add an item to cart, we can see this. But these buttons will not work. Let's add the code for that. First, let me add the handlers and create those functions. And in this function, let me increase the quantity, and in this function, let me decrease it. Let's test this. When I click add, we can see the button is changed. But if I click increase or decrease, it is not working. Any idea why it is not working? Actually, we are changing here, but we are not updating that in the context. Let's do that. First, let me copy this And instead of pushing this, let me find the index of this item in the cart. And when the index is greater than -1, let me change the quantity. And let me do the same for decrease as well. Now let's test. We can see it is working. So home page is almost done. Let's move to this fruits and vegetables page. We can create a single component for these pages and maintain the data through route params. Let me create the component first. And then let me define the route. I can use colon to define this route as parameterized route. Now it's time to add the links. For that, let me go to the header component. Here, let me import the link from React Router DOM. And here, for this, let me add the link. And for the two props, let me give it as /items/fruits. And for vegetables, let me give it as /items/vegetables. And so now we can see the route is getting changed. Okay, let's go to the items component and let's use params to get the route params. Please note, use params can be imported from this React Router DOM library. From this params, we can get the type. Let's show that in the title. For that, let me create a container div first, and inside that, let me have a div for heading. Here, let me show the type, like this. And so we can see the heading. Okay, now we need to get the categorized items here. Actually, in home page itself, we can store the categorized items in the context and take it here. But now, let's get the entire products from the context and do the categorization here. For that, let me get the state from the context. Let me also maintain a state in this component to store the items. And let me introduce a use effect. And inside that, let me loop through all the products and segregate only the items specific to this type. And then let me set this in state. Now to show the items, let me copy this code and modify it, because the design is going to be same. Ideally, as we are using this code, we should have created this also as a separate component, but this is okay. Let me also import this add item component. Now we can say this. Let me go to the other page. The items are not changing. Any idea why it is not changing? Actually, we are doing this inside use effect, and this will be called only once. So we need to add the dependency. Let's add the type as dependency. Now we can see the items are getting changed. The editor is suggesting to add the state.products also as dependency. No problem, we can add that also. Anyways, in this application, products is not going to change. Okay, this navigation is working now, but it would be good if you highlight the active link. To achieve that, in recent router version, we need to go for nav link instead of link. So let me change that first. In this, we can add a class name, and for that class name, we can apply some styles. I have already added styles for a class name called active. So if I add that here, we can see this is highlighted. But as I have hardcoded, if I move to the other page, this will not be changed. For that, instead of hardcoding, I can dynamically set the class name based on isActive condition, which is supported by this router. Let me add this in this nav link as well. Now we can see it is dynamically changing. Okay, and on clicking this logo, we should be able to go to the home page. For that, let me add nav link here as well. Now on clicking this, we can go to the home page. Okay, in home page, these links are not working. Let's fix them. Let me go to the banner component. Here, let me import link from React Router DOM library. And this should route to vegetables page. So let me add /items/vegetables here. And this also should go to vegetables page. And these two should go to the fruits page. Okay, let's test once. It's working. Now let's implement the cart page. First, let me create the cart component. And then let me go to the app component and add the routing for cart page. In header component, let me add the nav link so that we can be able to route to cart page. Now we can see this alignment issue is also fixed. Let me click this. We are able to navigate to the cart page. In cart component, let me have a container div and then a heading div so that we can see this. Now let me add a cart wrapper div. Inside that, let me have a div for cart details and another div for cart summary. Okay, let's get the cart first from the context. And then inside cart details, let me loop through the cart and show each item. Let me have the ID as key so that when we add some item in the cart and go to cart page, we can see this. Okay, here let me have a cart lift div. Inside that, let me show the image. And then let me have a cart middle div in which let me show the name and weight. And another div to show the price. Inside that, let me show the current price. When the current price and the previous price are different, let me show the previous price in a different style. Okay, and then let me have another div to show the discount, in which let me show the difference between the previous price and the current price. And so we can see this. And let me have a cart right div, in which let me show the add item component. Now we can change the quantity here as well. Finally, let's add a button container div. Inside that, let's have a button so that we can place the order. And we need to show all these only when there are some items in the cart. If there are no items, let's show a message. For that, let me cut this and only when state.cart.length greater than 0, let me show this. Otherwise, let me show another div. Your cart is empty. So that if I go to the home page and refresh and come to cart page, we can see the message. And if I add some item and come to cart page, we can see the cart. Okay, let's focus on the cart summary. Cart summary also, we are going to show only when there are items in the cart. So let me add the condition here also. Inside cart summary, first let me have a heading. And then I'm going to show MRP. For that, let me create a div. Inside that, let me show a label in the left and a value in the right. Okay, let me copy this and modify for product discount and total amount. Let's show the discount in negative and let's use a class to show it in different color. And for total also, let's add a class to highlight that. Okay, let's make these values dynamic. For that, let me create those states first. And then let me introduce an use effect. This use effect should run only when the cart changes. So let me add that in the dependency array. Okay, let me declare some temporary variables and initialize them as 0. Then let me loop through each item in the cart. And let me calculate the MRP, discount and total. These are the formulae. Finally, let me set the respective states. And let me change these hard-coded values. So if I change the quantity, we can see these values are also changing. Near to MRP, let's show the number of items. And we need to add a logic to show item or items. Okay, everything is good. Let's add functionality to this button. Let me add a handler first. And let me create this function. Actually, we need to route to the final page only when the user is logged in. But for now, let me navigate to the final page. For that, let me create the final component first. in which let me have a container div, and inside that let me have a message div. Your order is successfully placed. And then let me go to the app component and add the route. Okay. Coming back to the cart component, now we need to programmatically route to the final page. For that, we can use the use navigate hook from the React Router DOM library and navigate to the final page like this. So if I click this, we can go to the final page. After we move to the final page, we need to clear the cart in the state. Let's clear that here. Now if I go to the cart page and click place order button, we can see the cart is cleared. But if I go to the home page, we can see the selected items are still there. We need to reset that too. Let's do that. First, let me get the products from state, and then let me loop through each product and reset the quantity to 0. And then let me set that in state. Now let me add some product. Let me go to cart page and let me place the order. Now if I go to the items page or home page, we can see the selected items are cleared. Okay, let's move to login functionality. For that, let me create the login component. And let me add the route also. And in the header page, let me add the nav link. So if I click login, we can navigate to the login page. Let's develop our login form. In login page, let me add a container div, and inside that, let me add a heading. Then let me add a container for form, and inside that, let me have a form element. Inside form, let me have a form group div for username and another form group div for password. And then a button of type submit. So let me add a onSubmit handler in the form, and let me create this function as well. Okay, let me add a link for register. Anyways, we are not going to add the functionality for register. This is just for design. Okay, our form creation is done. Let's move to the form validation. For that, first let me use userefs and bind them to username and password input fields. If I click the login button, the form will be submitted. To prevent that default behavior, let me call the prevent default function from the event. Now it is okay. To validate the form, let me create a function. And let me call that function here. In this function, let me get the values of username and password. To show the error messages, let me create two states. And when the username is going to be empty string, let me set the username error state. Username is required. And here, when the username error.length is greater than 0, let me show the error. Now, if I submit without any value, we can see the error message. Similarly, let me set the error message for password. Here, let me reset the username error message, so that when I submit without any value, username error will be shown, and when I have some username and submit without password, password error will be shown. Now let me add an else condition to reset all the error messages. Also, let me have a variable and initialize that to false, and in else condition, let me change it to true. Finally, let me return that variable. That means this function is going to validate the form, and when the form is valid, it is going to return true, otherwise false. So let me get that here, and only if it is true, I am going to submit the form. Let me create this function also. Here also, let me get the values of the field. We need to pass these values to an API to validate whether the user is a valid user. I have already created an API for that. So let's use Axios here. First, let me import Axios. And here, let me call the post method from Axios, in which let me have the API URL, and as a second argument, let me pass the username and password as body. This is going to be a promise. And so let me resolve that. If it is success, we need to store this information somewhere. For that, let me create a new context. We can also store in the same application context, but in that case, we need to modify in every place, and also it would be nice to keep this context separately. In this new context, let me maintain a state. And in index.js, let me wrap this inside our new provider. So in login component, let me get this new context. And here, when it is success, let me set this state to true. Also, after successful login, we need to route the user to the home page. For that, let me use navigate. Like this. And when the user is not a valid user, we get an error. We need to notify that to user. For that, let me create an error block. I'm going to use this library to notify user. So let me install that first. Okay, let us see their implementation. We need to import these two. And we need to have this container. Let's have it here. Finally, I can call the toast method in which I can pass a message. So if I give some invalid credential and click login, we can see the toast. It would be good if it is entirely red. To customize that, let's check their documentation. We need to choose the type as error. And let's choose this colored theme. Okay, let me change our code accordingly. Let's change the auto close time as well. Okay, looks good. Now let me give the correct credential. We can see it is routed to home page. Here, after it is logged in, we need to change this to logout. For that, let me go to the header component and get the auth context. And here, let me show this only when the user is not logged in. When the user is logged in, let me show another div. This is also just to make the design better. Let me import this image. And so we can see this. Let's add a click handler to logout, in which let me set the is logged in state to false. And so when I click logout, it will be changed to login. Okay, our login functionality is completed. We need to handle one more thing in the cart page. Let me add few items in the cart. Now we are always routing to the final page even if the user is not logged in. Let's change that. In cart page, let's get the auth context. And here, let's navigate to final page only when the user is logged in. If not, let's navigate to login page. Let's test this. Now the user is not logged in. And so if I click this, we will see the login page. Let me log in. Now let me click this. Okay, we are able to place the order. We have created this complete application. Hope you enjoyed this video. I request you to try creating this application on your own. You can use a mock service or a mock data. If you stuck somewhere, you can refer my code. You can get my code from this repo. The link is also available in the description. See you in my next video on a new series. Please like this video, subscribe to my channel, share to your friends and support me. Thank you. Bye.